Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm delighted to move the motion that the House has debated the situation in Yemen. And can I say I am aware of the very great interest in this debate, so I'll make my comments as fast as possible, and if people would not intervene, that would be helpful. And I don't propose to take the few minutes at the end to respond, to give as many members as possible the opportunity to come in. And I would thank the Backbench Business Committee for granting this debate. We've tried many, many times. It was aborted some 6 months ago because of lockdown, and now at last we are able to debate this situation. The trouble is, the situation hasn't got any better. I'm not surprised there is so much interest in Yemen today, because it's become the victim of the most lethal and complex cocktail of an extended and ostensibly insoluble civil war with international ramifications, various other man-made disasters, numerous natural disasters and potentially catastrophic environmental ones, an economic meltdown, and now on top of it all, a deadly pandemic which Yemen was least prepared and equipped to deal with. And there was great interest beyond Parliament, with, I gather, more than 210,000 people having signed a petition calling for a ceasefire, and that's been tagged to this debate. Alas, in those 6 months in trying to secure this debate, the situation has deteriorated yet further on multiple fronts, and it is vital that despite all the distractions at home and across the world dealing with the pandemic, we should not forget nor neglect the world's worst humanitarian disaster that Yemen remains. Now, I chair the all-party group for Yemen, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I pay tribute, first of all, to my predecessor, the member for Neon Valley, who will be participating in the debate, I'm glad to see, and also the secretariat provided by Jack Patterson, who's kept members updated and arranged briefings, including just this Tuesday with the British Deputy Ambassador in Yemen, Simon Smart, the military attaché, and representatives from Oxfam and Médecins Sans Frontières, who, with many other aid agencies, are doing such an amazing job in almost impossible conditions in the Yemen. I pay tribute to all of those agencies and workers. To deal with the political and military situation first, 2020 marks 5 years of a devastating conflict in the Yemen and almost 10 years of chaos since the Arab Spring in that country. Yemen desperately needs an effective and lasting ceasefire. 24 million people out of a total population of some 30 million rely wholly or partly on aid, and they desperately need protection now. Yet ceasefires and peace agreements in Yemen have a reputation for being broken almost as soon as they are brokered. The Comprehensive Stockholm Agreement, brokered in December 2018 and set out a comprehensive peace plan, it was backed in January 2019 by the United Nations, unanimously adopting the UK drafted Resolution 2452, which established a special political mission and special envoy Martin Griffiths, who's worked tirelessly to secure a settlement. It promised the withdrawal of Houthi and government-led forces from Hodeidah, a large-scale prisoner transfer, UN observers and various other urgently needed measures. The UAE, who have been very involved with the conflict, stepped back ostensibly and withdrew their troops from Yemen. The position has been complicated, though, by the emergence of the Southern Transitional Council, who've taken control of Aden, fragmenting the government position in trying to present a united resistance to the Houthis. And great store has been placed on the Riyadh Agreement, signed in December 2019 between the Yemeni government and the STC, outlining a series of measures to bring peace to the south of Yemen. But the agreement broke after just 8 months, though Martin Griffiths and others worked hard to revive it. The fragile pause in the conflict in 2019 broke down in 2020 after an attack in northern Yemen. A unilateral ceasefire by the Saudi-led coalition in April 2020 in the light of COVID-19 expired in May, but The Guardian reported that the Houthis had broken a truce no fewer than 241 times in the space of just 2 days. I could talk about abuses on all sides. The 42 airstrikes in July alone, which particularly impacted and killed civilians. Drones dropping grenades on civilian targets. Houthi missiles strikes on Riyadh in Saudi Arabia just earlier this month. The catalogue of abuse, devastation, destruction and mistrust on all sides goes on. As a result, 10 new front lines have emerged since the beginning of 2020, with particularly intense fighting in the last 4 months, especially around the strategically important areas of Marib, which controls access to the oil fields, Taiz and in the Hudaydah Governorate on the west coast. Madam Deputy Speaker, peace is as elusive as ever, yet death and suffering is worse than ever. Over 250,000 Yemenis, at least, have died since 2015, including 100,000 as a result of combat and 130,000 from hunger and disease, and that is probably a very conservative estimate. It includes an estimated 1,000 civilians killed or seriously injured in the first 6 months of this year, killed in the conflict, and that included 100 children. There are over 2 million internally displaced people, with the majority in and around Marib, currently under siege from the Houthis, who are throwing everything at that city, despite the very high casualties being suffered, but clearly they view the lives of their troops as cheap. 24.3 million people need humanitarian aid. 24.3 million out of a population of 30 million. That includes 12.2 million children. 20.1 million people are food insecure. 20.5 million people lack clean water or sanitation. There have been over 2.3 million cholera cases since 2017 as a collapsed health system has been woefully inadequate even before COVID hit. The exact impact of COVID is unknown, with the just 1,000 cases reported in Sana'a surely being a woeful underestimate of the reality. And we all saw the news-reported images of mass graves being dug in the capital. The International Rescue Committee projects the most likely scenario that COVID could infect nearly 16 million people and kill over 42,000, making the fatality rate in Yemen one of the highest in the world. And there's little chance of testing. If you think we have a problem with testing in the United Kingdom, there are just 118 tests for every 1 million people in Yemen, against 41,500 comparably in the UK. Just 0.01% of the population stands a chance of being tested. And there's no clue of how they're going to cope if they're hit by a second wave. Since 2015, air raids have hit water and health facilities over 200 times. And Oxfam reports that those remaining often lack electricity and fresh water, and if you do find a hospital operating, then fuel is so expensive that people in remoter areas cannot get transport to hospital and their conditions worsen untreated. Médecins Sans Frontières, whose volunteers have done incredible work under fire, report that many medical staff, if not most, have not been paid for years and they struggle to survive themselves and carry on their jobs in the most extraordinary circumstances. The water shortage has brought big challenges for food supply as well, as farmers cannot irrigate their crops and now import more than 90% of Yemen's food. With a collapsing currency and an economy that has shrunk by 45% since 2015, UNICEF is forecasting that the number of malnourished children under the age of 5 will grow by 20% in the next 6 months to reach 2.4 million. 2.4 million malnourished children. And very briefly, I will.
For him giving way, I thank him for leading this debate, and I think the way that he's making a statement makes it just so clear how heartbreaking the situation is for the people on the ground in Yemen at the moment. Does he agree with me that this is why we should stand proud and firm by the 0.7% of aid that this country gives to other countries, because it is so sorely needed, especially now during this pandemic?
I absolutely agree with the Honourable Lady, and I will finish on the figures from the United Kingdom, where we have been the third largest donor and are actually one of the most important donors at the moment, and the reasons are obvious and the results are so important. And to cap it all, ironically, recent floods in Hajar and Amran have destroyed crops, and they've now been hit by swarms of locusts. Truly a human tragedy of biblical proportions. Added to which, the Red Sea faces a potential environmental catastrophe from the SFO Safer, a 45-year-old oil tanker loaded with over 1 million barrels of crude oil, anchored 60 kilometres off rebel-held port of Hudaydah, and left to decay for the last 5 years with no agreement over access for engineers. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, we can see why the country is almost totally dependent on aid from the international community and the heroic efforts of aid organisations and their staff working in extremely dangerous conditions from the conflict and disease, and with the added challenge of getting aid in through blockaded ports under fire or the main airport, which is now closed again, and the everyday problems of corruption and bureaucracy on all sides, using access to aid as a military weapon. Indeed, the Houthis tried to impose a tax on aid supplies coming in, NGO buildings have been looted and aid workers arrested. And the aid itself is now seriously in question, as so far this year only 37% of the requested funding in the humanitarian response plan has been met, as some of the previously most generous donors, including the US, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, have reduced or withdrawn their funding at just the worst possible time. As the IRC points out, it was this funding that narrowly prevented famine 2 years ago. But now more than 9 million Yemenis have seen aid cut, driving them to the brink of starvation. 12 of the UN's major 30 programmes have already been scaled back, and a further 20 programmes could be reduced or closed completely if funding fails to emerge urgently. Yemen is facing a perfect storm of a crumbling economy, reducing aid, restrictions placed on humanitarian access by warring parties, the continuing impact of an intractable conflict, and now the additional pressures of COVID. Amidst all of this, the support and financial aid from the United Kingdom has been a rare but desperately needed constant. We are the third largest donor behind the US and Saudi Arabia. The UK has committed nearly £1 billion of assistance since the conflict began, including £160 million at the recent pledging conference. UK support has met the immediate food needs of more than 1 million Yemenis every month. It's treated 70,000 children for malnutrition and provided over 1 million people with improved water and basic sanitation. And the new money in the last round will provide medical consultations, train 12,000 healthcare workers and boost 4,000 crumbling health centres and help in the fight against COVID. The Education Can't Wait campaign has helped girls especially missing out on education and helped programmes against the rise in violence against women and girls in particular and against child labour. All problems, as if Yemen didn't have enough problems already. As the pen holder on Yemen at the UN Security Council, the UK is in a crucial position and is leading the international community to do more to respond to the Yemen crisis. Andrew Griffiths is doing an extraordinary job. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have a proud record of support, and I hope the Minister, when he speaks, will confirm that that support will continue. But there can be no real progress without a sustainable ceasefire leading to peace talks which are broad and inclusive, not just with government forces, with the STC, with the Houthis, but also all aspects of civil society and with the support of the regional powers who will hopefully return to the donor table. Again, I hope the Minister can update the House about the UK continuing to play a leading and proactive role to help bring this about. Madam Deputy Speaker, Yemen is the world's worst humanitarian disaster. And the world's preoccupation with fighting COVID at the moment cannot be an excuse for sidelining the unfolding tragedy that continues to engulf the Arab world's poorest nation. It is difficult to think of a more tragic combination of circumstances affecting a nation and its people quite as toxically and systematically as is happening now in Yemen and has been going on for far too long. It is time for peace. It is time for the world to put pressure on the warring factions and their backers, and time to rally around the people of Yemen, to regroup, recover and rebuild. I'm sure the whole House will want to show its support for that.
The question is, as on the order paper.